Captain on deck, a young ensign called out as Captain Jeffrey Circus stepped through the hatch that led to the Combat Information Center CCICC. "As you were," the captain replied, acknowledging the protocol, but with a tone that reflected his years of experience. It was Captain Circus's 10th year in command of the Tan Union starship Reliant, a Valkyrie-class battle carrier. The ship, distinguished by its fewer fighters but heavier armament compared to standard Victory-class fleet carriers, boasted armor and weaponry that fell between the formidable Kraken-class heavy cruisers and the colossal Leviathan-class battleships. Currently, the Reliant was docked at Visa 3 outpost for resupply and repairs along with the rest of the squadron. Captain Circus returned the salute of his executive officer XO, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wu, a reliable officer and friend. "What do we have, Sarah?" he asked, utilizing his privilege as captain to address her by her first name. "Morning, Captain. Sorry to get you up here so early, but there's a situation you should know about," she replied, her voice tinged with concern. Captain Circus moved closer to examine the console as Lieutenant Commander Wu began her report. A Kinsel convoy reported trouble with pirates and requested permission to dock for repairs. One of their ships is docking to get their wounded treated. The captain nodded, processing the information quickly. "Okay, a bit far out for them, but what's the problem?" he inquired, sensing there was more to the story. "Well, sir, where are their escorts? They might be chasing the pirates, but they never mentioned them. I also ordered a scan for damage in case we needed to assist," Sarah explained, her concern evident. "And what did the scan show?" the captain asked, leaning in. "Nothing, sir," she replied. "No damage?" he questioned, his brow furrowing. "No, nothing, sir. It's like our scans were being blocked by something or someone." Lieutenant Commander Wu finished, her voice dropping slightly, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Scanners functioning correctly?" the captain asked, a growing sense of unease creeping into his mind. "Aye, sir. I checked with engineering and did a quick scan of the station," Sarah replied confidently. "You're right, Lieutenant Commander. Something is definitely off," he agreed, his instincts honed by years of command telling him this was no routine situation. "Sound general quarters, if you please." Captain Circus ordered, his tone all business now, though the words were barely out of his mouth before one of the CIC techs shouted, "We've got inbound, bearing 310, range 10 clicks." The ship shuddered violently as a torpedo impacted. "Where did that come from?" the captain demanded, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. "From one of the Kinsel freighters, sir. Others have launched torpedoes at the squadron," the tech replied, panic rising in his voice. "Battle stations," Lieutenant Commander Captain Circus commanded, his voice calm but forceful, a rock of stability in the storm brewing around them. And then shag-ass to the bridge, he added, the urgency clear in his tone. "Sir, message from the station," another tech called out, the tension in the CICC palpable. "What's the message?" the captain asked, his focus sharp. "Kinsel shock troops are boarding the station and requesting any available aid," the tech reported, the situation escalating rapidly. Captain Circus glanced at his XO, who was already moving. "Did you catch that? Send half our security detail to assist," he ordered. "Aye, sir, I'll get them started and then head to sea," she responded efficiently. "Thank you, Sarah. See you after," he nodded. A second torpedo hit, rocking the ship as she left. "Sir, enemy ship on a collision course with the station shield emitter," another tech shouted. "Ah, hell. Port batteries. Fire on that ship," the captain roared, the CICIC a blur of activity as the crew responded. A brief flash of light confirmed it was too late. The station's shields were down. "Station shields are down, sir," the tech confirmed, his voice strained. "Scanners detect incoming vessels," another tech reported, the tension in the room ratcheting up another notch. "Remember your training." "I need numbers and an incoming bearing," Captain Circus replied, his voice a stabilizing force. "Aye, sir." "Sorry, sir," the sensor tech responded, quickly pulling up the data. 20 ships of unknown type, bearing 349, he reported. The captain asked, steeling himself for the answer. 6 minutes, sir, the tech replied, his voice tight. Thank you, the captain acknowledged, turning to the communications tech. Send that message to the station and all ships, he ordered. Aye, sir, the tech replied, fingers flying over the console. Captain Circus checked the screens one more time before issuing his next orders. Launch all fighters, bring all weapon systems online, and take out the rest of those damn freighters. The moment the security detail has boarded the station, break us free. He commanded, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. He pressed another button on his console, connecting to his exo. Did you copy that, exo, he asked. Aye, sir, she replied, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of tension. I'll be there momentarily, she added. Status of the fleet, the captain asked, already dreading the answer. No sign of being ready to fight, sir, a lieutenant responded, confirming his fears. Thank you, Lieutenant Wallace. Keep an eye on them and update me on their condition. He ordered, muttering under his breath about both hands and a flashlight, a familiar refrain when things went sideways. Sir, the computer has identified the incoming ships as 9 capital ships and 11 support vessels, the sensor tech called out. Captain, I've reached the bridge, and the security detail has left the ship, the exo reported, her voice steady despite the escalating situation. Very good, Lieutenant Commander. Break us loose and get moving. We're sitting ducks here, the captain ordered. The engines rumbled beneath his feet as the ship began to move. Sir, I have the Commodore on the line, the comms tech reported. Commodore, tell her, did you copy our sensor data, the captain asked. Affirmed, the Commodore replied, his voice strained but controlled. What's your status, Jeffy asked, the familiarity of the question cutting through the formalities. We're moving to engage. I'm about to launch my fighters, and I sent part of my security force to aid the station, Captain Circus replied, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Commodore's voice softened slightly, a note of gratitude slipping through. I knew I could count on you. Can you buy us some time to get the rest of the squadron moving? The Kofax is offline for repairs, but I can launch my fighters. I'll kick the other 4 captains in the ass to get moving. It's long odds, but we'll give it hell, he finished, his resolve clear. We'll do our best, Sir, Captain Circus replied, the connection closing as the Commodore's voice faded. Captain Circus watched as the last of the undocked freighters exploded. A brief but satisfying sight before the sensor tech announced the arrival of the enemy fleet. Sir, the enemy fleet is landing, the tech reported, his voice tinged with surprise. 3 TK Shaw-class heavy cruisers, 3 VTH-class battleships, 2 Vutha-class carriers, 4 Talag-class light cruisers, and 7 mixed-class destroyers and support vessels. The tech listed quickly, his fingers dancing over the controls. I thought you said there were 20, the captain asked, his voice sharp with urgency. Yes, sir, but it's just landing now. It's a Kick-Saucer-class supercarrier, the tech replied, disbelief creeping into his voice. Well, Captain Circus mused, a grim smile forming. They must want this place badly to send one of those out of their territory. He quickly issued new orders. Fighter Ops, inform CIC to have 2 squadrons begin suppression runs on enemy weapon emplacements. The rest engage enemy fighters. We'll be getting more fighters to assist them momentarily, he directed. He then touched the button to speak directly to the bridge, his voice firm as he said, Lieutenant Commander, set course for that supercarrier. We might have a chance if we can get it off the field, aye. Sir, the XO replied, excitement tinging her voice. Captain Circus couldn't help but smile. Someone remind her this isn't a starfighter she's flying, he quipped, drawing a few chuckles from the crew. The mood shifted quickly back to the seriousness of the battle as fire control opened up with the main batteries, targeting the supercarrier. The massive particle cannons slid open, and the 4 turrets mounting large railguns shifted to target the enemy ship. A formidable array of secondary armaments was deployed along the ship's sides, from medium railguns to missile launchers loaded with hammerhead missiles and smaller autocannons for defensive fire. Damn it! Captain Circus muttered, the limitations of projectile weapons frustrating in the face of the enemy's advanced shields. Yet the Terran armor was laser-resistant, reducing damage by 70%, giving them a fighting chance. The captain watched intently as the battle unfolded, the sphere of combat surrounding both fleets and the station. The Kinsel's unexpected tactic of engaging at such close range baffled him. They usually preferred long-range combat. They must not have expected Terran warships to be present, he thought aloud. Let's give them a lesson in close combat. Then the captain declared, his eyes narrowing as he issued orders. XO, head straight for that supercarrier and take us along the ventral side. Once under, we'll rake her with everything we've got, even the autocannons. Just don't crash into her. He warned, a hint of humor in his voice, despite the gravity of the situation. The XO's laugh was brief but genuine, a sign of her confidence. The battle outside intensified, brief flashes along the hull indicating where enemy lasers made contact, while the human weapons returned fire with devastating effect. Captain Circus listened to the damage control reports, only half his attention on them as he focused on the larger picture. The rest of the squadron finally joined the fight, and the decrease in incoming fire was palpable. The supercarrier loomed closer on the monitors, its massive size dwarfing the Reliant. Fire control, as soon as we pass beneath her, open up with everything that can hit her, even the autocannons. He commanded. The fire control officer nodded, understanding the critical timing. And ready the first rack of Shrikes. Fire them at the engines once we're clear, the captain added. The officer looked at him questioningly, but Captain Circus just nodded. I know, but we should be moving fast enough to escape the shockwave when those Shrikes explode, he explained, his voice calm and sure. XO, the moment we clear the underside, I'm launching the Shrikes, so get us the hell out of here. He ordered, the stress of the moment causing him to drop protocol. The XO sounded surprised but simply responded. I, Sir. Captain Circus watched in satisfaction as railguns, autocannons, and missiles raked the supercarrier from stem to stern, tearing chunks from its ventral side. The massive ship was 3 times the size of the Reliant, but at this close range it was vulnerable. Fire control. Arm the Shrikes. Wait for my command, the captain ordered, his focus intense as the distance between the ships increased. His hand hovered over the console, ready to give the order. Bridge, XO, stand by, he called out. Fire, he yelled, his arm dropping as the order was given. Get us the hell out of here, Sarah, he commanded, the urgency in his voice clear. The 8 heavy missiles struck the supercarrier's thruster nozzles with deadly precision, channeling some of the blast directly into the engines. Direct hit, the fire control officer called out, excitement in his voice. She's losing power, sir, another tech reported. Excellent work, people. Captain Circus congratulated them, his voice filled with pride. XO, get us back into the fight. Fire control, full reload of all weapon systems. When in range, the carriers are the primary targets. Fighter ops, prepare for recovery and rearming of our fighters. Engineering, what's our status? He continued, issuing a steady stream of orders. With the supercarrier floating dead in space, Captain Circus took a moment to assess the overall situation. The fleet was battered but still in the fight. The Aurora was heavily damaged and out of action, and he feared the worst for the Nebula, whose debris cloud suggested total destruction. But the Kinsel were paying a heavy price for their betrayal. Less than half of their fleet remained, with only 3 capital ships still operational. The Reliance fighters began returning for rearmament, their ranks thinned but still capable. The captain ordered the main guns to focus on the port carrier, knowing its shields were down. The port carrier had no chance against the Reliance railguns and missiles, one of which must have hit the fuel storage for their fighters, resulting in a massive explosion that tore the ship in half. As if that were a signal, the Kinsel began breaking contact and retreating, stopping only to retrieve life pods and shuttles from the supercarrier. A wave of explosions rippled across the surface of the supercarrier as the Kinzel scuttled it, denying the Terrans the prize of capturing it intact. Captain Circus watched the last few enemy fighters make desperate, suicidal runs. Only the Aurora was hit, and then the battlefield was eerily silent, except for the calls for help on the search and rescue SNR frequencies. "Fighter ops, bring our birds home," he ordered, his voice calm as the adrenaline began to wear off. "Fire control, secure all batteries but leave 2 dual mounts per side online. Damage control, coordinate with the XO on extra personnel. Comms, get me an update on the status of the Kinzel boarding parties and if we need to send more troops." He continued, methodically working through the tasks needed to secure the ship and prepare for the next phase. They would mourn their dead later, but first, the living needed attention. Captain Circus's thoughts drifted briefly to the reason for this sudden betrayal. The supposed Kinzel allies had turned on them, and he feared this wouldn't be the last time. There would be many questions to answer, but those would have to wait. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Ken Taylor was jolted awake from a pleasant dream by the first impact, his mind still groggy as he registered the emergency. "WTF" was that he exclaimed, rubbing sleep from his eyes as the ship shuddered. One of his fellow pilots, Mike Barnes, was on the floor clutching a broken wrist. "How bad is it?" Taylor asked, dropping from his bunk to check on his friend. "Hurts like hell," Barnes grunted, his face pale. Lieutenant Taylor looked at the other 2 pilots sharing the room. "Get him up to sick bay," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The others nodded, helping Barnes to his feet just as the ship was rocked by another explosion. The general quarters alarm blared. "General quarters, man your battle stations." This is not a drill. The urgency in the announcement made Taylor's heart pound, adrenaline surging through his system as he grabbed his flight gear. He sprinted down the passageway towards the hangar, years of training and practice guiding his every step. His muscles moved on autopilot, dodging other crew members and ducking through hatch doors with practiced ease. Reaching the pilot locker room, he and his fellow pilots slipped into their flight suits, their movements swift and efficient. Luck, Taylor shouted to his bunkmates before dashing towards his Starhawk fighter. The 18-meter-long, 10-meter-wide craft was a marvel of human engineering, its sleek design influenced by 21st-century fighter jets. With twin helix thrusters for main propulsion and multiple navigation thrusters for maneuverability, the Starhawk could spin 360 degrees along any axis. Its formidable armament included missile launchers, 4 nose-mounted autocannons, and 2 ventrally mounted medium railguns. The design was meant to evoke the heroic days of fighter aces, boosting pilot morale even as they flew into deadly combat. "Pilots, man your planes," the PA system blared, the Navy tradition holding strong even in the far future. Taylor hurriedly finished his pre-flight checks with the help of his ground crew, who ensured his flight suit was sealed, sensors were cleaned, and contact points were verified. They assisted him into the cockpit, where he donned his helmet, leaving the visor open as he ran a quick systems check. The crew gave him a thumbs up, signaling that everything was ready. "Happy hunting, sir," one of them said as they pushed his fighter into the launch tunnel. Taylor felt the familiar rush of acceleration as his Starhawk was catapulted into space, the sheer force pinning him back in his seat. The transition from the controlled environment of the ship to the chaos of space combat was always jarring, but Taylor was used to it. Outside, the battle was raging, with human tracer rounds and alien energy weapons crisscrossing the void. The sheer intensity of the firefight made it difficult to keep track of friend and foe. Explosions lit up the darkness as fighters on both sides were hit, sometimes by lucky shots, sometimes by skillful maneuvers. The TAC nets were alive with chatter, pilots calling out orders, warnings, and occasionally curses as they tried to form up on their leaders. "What the hell? Those are Kinzel ships," someone exclaimed over the comms. "Aren't they supposed to be our allies?" another voice questioned, disbelief evident. Can the chatter the CAG's voice cut through the noise, authoritative and calm? "Worry about that later." Echo and Black Squadrons, Suppression runs on enemy weapon emplacements. The rest of you on me. Stay with your wingmen, and let's go mix it up with them." The CAG finished, the order clear. The Reliant was one of the few ships to get all her fighters into the air, but even so, the human pilots were outnumbered 2-1, a situation some called a target-rich environment. 80 Starhawks drove straight into the heart of the enemy formation, scattering the Kinzel fighters like a flock of startled birds. The squadrons split into elements, then into pairs, each pilot fighting to survive in the swirling chaos of space combat. The dogfights were brutal and relentless, each pilot focused solely on staying alive and taking down as many enemies as possible. In space, they say no one can hear you scream, but the TAC nets told a different story filled with orders, cries for help, and the dying screams of pilots. Tiny flashes of light marked the destruction of fighters on both sides, a grim reminder of the lethal dance they were engaged in. Lieutenant Taylor lost his wingmen in the chaos, but he had no time to mourn, immediately engaging a pair of onrushing enemy fighters. He managed to take down one with a pair of Shrike missiles before finding himself locked in combat with the other, his entire focus on surviving the deadly encounter. The space around the Reliant was a battlefield of barely controlled chaos. Fighters darted and weaved, pouncing on targets and dodging enemy fire, all while trying to avoid the deadly anti-aircraft fire from the capital ships below. The capital ships themselves were locked in a brutal exchange, their main and secondary batteries hammering each other relentlessly. Missile launchers emptied their arsenals almost as quickly as they could be reloaded, filling the void with streaks of deadly light. Wreckage and bodies floated in the aftermath of each explosion, marking the loss of another life in the relentless carnage. The Kinzel pilots were highly skilled, but the Terrans fought with a ferocity born of anger and betrayal, their tactics honed by years of bitter conflict. Lieutenant Taylor had to return to the Reliant to rearm, his fighter battered but still functional. He wondered if he would need to do it again before the battle was over, but his mind was already weary from the constant strain of combat. Flesh and blood can only endure so much, and it was the Kinzel who finally broke. With the destruction of their supercarrier, the remaining Kinzel fighters retreated to their surviving ships, which then jumped out of the system. The few fighters left behind made desperate, suicidal runs at the Terran ships, with one managing to hit the already damaged Aurora. Then, suddenly, the TAC nets were silent, the frenetic chatter replaced by the somber calls for search and rescue operations. All fighters, return to ship, came the order from the Reliant, repeated by the surviving squadron and element leaders. Lieutenant Taylor waited his turn to land, priority given to wounded pilots and heavily damaged ships. It was always a relief to return home safely, but today the sense of victory was tempered by the heavy losses. As the ground crew unhooked him from his fighter, and he climbed out of the cockpit, Taylor took in the damage to his ship. Scorch marks and holes pockmarked the hull, but nothing too severe. He turned to his crew chief, a grizzled veteran who had seen too many battles. "What's the casualty count?" Chief Taylor asked, dreading the answer. Chief Simmons grimaced, his voice heavy with sorrow. 22 confirmed dead, 18 Mia, and I don't have an exact count of the wounded yet. At least 10 birds won't ever fly again, he reported, the weight of the losses clear in his tone. Any casualties on the flight deck crew? Taylor pressed, knowing the toll would be high. 7 dead, 16 wounded. Most when a bird crashed and exploded while landing, the chief replied, his voice thick with barely suppressed grief. Taylor clapped him on the shoulder, a silent gesture of shared loss. "I need to report in, but we'll get together later to hoist a glass to our fallen," he promised. "Yes, sir, and glad you made it," Chief Simmons replied, his voice quiet. As Taylor made his way to change out of his flight suit, he noticed several planes in the hangar that weren't from the Reliant. Closer inspection revealed they were from the Nebula, some of the last survivors of her crew. The sight was a stark reminder of the day's losses. As he walked through the hatch, Taylor spotted Lieutenant Harris and headed over to greet him. "Harris, glad to see you made it." "Where's Todd?" Taylor asked, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Harris just shook his head, his face a mask of grief. "Damn it," Taylor muttered, the loss of another friend hitting hard. "Any idea who else we lost?" he continued, bracing himself for more bad news. "Green, early in the fight," Harris replied, his voice hollow. "Jackson, Gonzalez, Dixon, and Noburo are the only others I know," he added, the list of names a painful roll call of the dead. There were going to be a lot of empty racks on the ship after today, and many of them had belonged to friends. Taylor's thoughts turned to the tasks ahead, the reports, the briefings, the endless questions that would need answering. But all he wanted now was a shower, some food, and a few hours of rest. The exhaustion was bone deep, but he knew sleep would not come easily. Instead, he would replay the battle in his mind over and over, analyzing every move, every decision, wondering if he could have done something different to save a life, to keep another bunk from being empty. But those thoughts would have to wait. For now, there were still so many things to do before he could rest. And even when he did, the faces of the fallen would haunt his dreams, their absence a heavy burden on his soul. But first, a shower, to wash away the grime and loosen the stiff muscles gained from hours of dogfighting enemy fighters. Only then would he allow himself a moment to grieve, to remember the friends who had not made it back, and to prepare for the battles yet to come. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says, we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.